Seems that every news story these days is one crisis after another. Our globally connected, increasingly politicized culture that has instant access to two-way communication is creating more crises and opportunities for executive leaders. How these leaders manage and respond to crises can be a critical factor in their career and company performance. Today, I'm joined by Stephanie Craig, president of Kith, an elite crisis management company and one of the country's top crisis and reputation strategists. Having worked in business and politics, she served as a trusted advisor to a former First Lady, members of Congress, and C-suite officers. She's also likely the only person on the planet to have served both in the US House and Senate and the Canadian House and Senate. Welcome to the Working Well podcast. I'm Tim Boris. Today, we're going to dive into crisis management, along with other leadership, employee well-being, and future of work topics. Welcome, Stephanie, to the Working Well podcast. It's great to reconnect.
Hi, Tim. I'm so thrilled to be with you today.
Well, I'm excited to jump in and talk about crisis management with all the things going on in the world. You must be busier than anyone I've ever met.
Well, I think probably, as my granddaddy used to say, I'm busier than a one-armed paper hanger. So if anyone remembers old school wallpaper, that's what it goes back to. So we are pretty busy. It's a lot of uncharted territory.
Undeniably so. Now, before we dive into the logistics of crisis management, you have a really unique background. So tell me, how did you get into this field in the first place?
Well, there's kind of two indicators that this was the life I was destined for. I come from a long line of people that run towards bullets. Mine are just verbal. So here's the big headline. I grew up in Canada, very proud Canadian and very proud American. So my grandfather's from Normandy, Juno Beach, with the Fort Garry horse, which a lot of your folks will probably know of. Then my dad was a Mountie. So I come from a long line of that. And as my mom used to say, I have experienced every kind of natural disaster except a tsunami. So I just have no desire to cross that one off the list. But through all of these experiences and then years and years of politics, I found out that my happy place is the place when most other people are losing their heads. That's when I'm the calmest. And through all of that, I figured out, this is kind of what I want to do. This is what makes me happy, and I can do it as a profession. And so I mentioned I grew up in Canada. So I was born in the Yukon, so the Canadian Arctic, which is a unique place to grow up. Then we moved north to the Northwest Territories and a place called Fort Good Hope, which is the only place that is of that size consistently on a world map, because it is the intersection of the Mackenzie River and the Arctic Circle.
Very cool. Well, not too many people have grown up there.
Yes. And then I grew up all throughout Manitoba, but I've been consistently moving south for the last number of years. And I'm probably the only person you will meet that has worked in the US House and Senate and the Canadian House and Senate. So I come from politics with some pretty good chops. And politics is a great proving ground for crisis management. I think from the outside, it looks like everything is always in crisis. But
well, these days, everything is like totally status quo, right?
Nothing's happening ever. But there was this woman on my very first campaign when I was just 20, I think I was 21, and I cannot remember her last name. Her name was Leslie, and she worked for former Foreign Minister Axworthy. And she showed me one day how you could turn something that wasn't going to turn out well. We'd expected like a whole bunch of people at an event, and it rained a lot. And so only a handful of people were coming. And so what was supposed to be a big event, she turned it into a round table. And it was that kind of, quite honestly, it turned out much better because these people that really wanted to have their questions answered got a chance to have their questions answered, because they got to sit there at a table with the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and he was also their MP. So they had this really great exchange and these really great opportunities to talk to him. And so it really turned out better. It was the first real example of how to manage a situation and a lot of times make it better than it would have been in the first place. And over the course of my career, so I've, like I said, been on and off the Hill on political campaigns in both countries, had a chance to work with some of the best crisis managers around. And then I ended up going to companies to do turnarounds. They'd have a major problem, I'd come in and I'd fix it, and then I would move on. And I'd actually started my own company 8 years ago and had some pretty neat clients. One of my clients was the former mayor of San Jose, California. So you can imagine helping everybody, manage their way through everything that comes with the city. So got to advise the mayor, got to work with this great city home to so much innovation through some of their toughest times, COVID being one. Such a tough time. And then I think this might have been one of the highlights of a really cool career. Is my other client was the Rosalind Carter Institute for Caregivers. So
Very
Rosalind Carter
cool.
being former First Lady, and highlight was I got to work with her to write some national columns to insert the caregiving issue into the national election in 2020. And there's only like 3 little edits to it. So she was a notoriously brilliant writer. So to get something back with 3 little edits from Mrs. Carter was quite impressive. But old colleague of mine started Kith a number of years ago. He wanted to take a step back, so he asked me to come and run it. And now I am running just a very um, I like to call us a very precise crisis management company. And I use the word precise because we don't span off into all other aspects of communication or management. We are strictly crisis management, the preparation, the mitigation, and the response.
Excellent. Well, and we briefly alluded to some of the crises going on, and I'm sure the situations you deal with run the gamut. But what what types of crises are we talking about here that you work with?
Well, we're actually very crisis agnostic, and that sounds really
Okay.
strange. But the core of what we do is management. We work with people to help navigate situations, but there always needs to be a quarterback in that situation. Somebody that can call the shots. And as anyone that follows football, there are different specialties for different positions. And that's why I'm a huge believer in keeping a really active, vibrant, diverse address book of people that have great expertise. Because it's not always going to be a data breach. It's not always going to be a workplace incident. It's not always going to be a social media furor. It's all going to be something different, and so understanding which players need to be on the team is what our specialty is. And that's the response part of it. Those are the times when people wake up at and they find out something really bad has happened and they call us at 3 o'clock in the morning. Those are the really bad days. We have put an emphasis on crisis preparation and working with people to help turn those really bad days into less bad. And there's a formula to it, and there's a strategy to it that can you prevent them? Maybe, but you certainly can prepare for them. And so understanding your own crisis paradigm is the baseline of crisis preparedness because everyone's going to have a different version of what a crisis is. If
Okay.
you make widgets, your widget company, your widget factory catching on fire, that's a crisis. You are a financial services company, a data breach, that is a crisis. But to the same, to both of those people, it's not going to be the same thing. And so the very baseline of good crisis management is having a common understanding within your organization of what crisis means to you.
So, Stephanie, as you were talking, it sounds like, yeah, in my mind, I was thinking crises were like these external media things. So it might not necessarily be, it might be internal crises as well in the office. So you do you work on those as well?
If we do our job right, the crisis doesn't really become external.
Okay.
So there's that's also part of my address book, some very talented crisis communicators. But a lot of times when you're in a crisis, you want your communicators to be your regular folks that you use, the people that have built trust with your audience, built trust with your community. Because taking folks in that just do crisis from a crisis comms perspective, if you want them to, it's not a good idea, quite frankly, to have them be the face of your organization externally. Because
Okay.
the number one thing that you want to do in a crisis is you want to instill trust in your stakeholders. And injecting somebody new, that folks that you need to trust you, your stakeholders, injecting somebody new is not going to be the best path forward. You want someone that can deliver a message of, you need to be honest, but they also need to trust the deliverer.
Now, Stephanie, one of the things you mentioned when we chatted last time was that you didn't see crisis management as just the communications aspect, but more of a leadership philosophy. Can you speak to that?
Well, if you just think about crisis when it happens, and if you think that it is something that can just be fixed by communicating, you've already lost the battle. And something that you and I both share is a history of intense athletics. And one of the philosophies that I take from being a competitive figure skater, and this might really resonate with you, Tim, as well, you have to think through how things could go wrong. And so as a figure skater, you're going into the jump. What does that look like? You're doing the jump. What do your rotations look like? You're landing. What does that look like? What can go wrong and what can I fix to make sure it doesn't go wrong? Unfortunately, people's natural inclination is to not want to think about the bad days, to not want to think about what can go wrong. But that, when you're thinking about crisis preparation, is critically important. Because if you think about what could go wrong today, when it goes wrong, it might not be as bad. So it's applying this idea as a leader that you want to work through the problem before it happens so you can see where the problems are going to arise and mitigate for them. There are some, there are some crises that are just going to happen. An earthquake, a snowstorm, a tornado, aliens landing. They're all, that's not something you can prepare for externally. But there are also things that you can prepare for. Mhm. So if you've had a history of disgruntled employees, for instance, that take to social media, that take to your community and badmouth in your community, that can be mitigated through your hiring process. Understand what your values are as a company and make sure that you're hiring people that fit into those values and those ideas as you bring them in, because that makes for a more harmonious environment. Um, I had a friend, gosh, this was a number of years ago. They had to let somebody go. And she absolutely, like, this woman took a lawn chair and set it up on the sidewalk outside of her former place of work. And we look back and we saw, okay, well, she wasn't a good fit, but she didn't take it very well. The good news to that, and this is the second part of really being smart about investing in crisis management, is that the people that were the audience, the stakeholders of the organization that she'd been fired from, knew the organization. They trusted the organization. So when this woman was saying things about this organization that weren't true, their stakeholders knew it wasn't true because they had invested in showing who they were to their stakeholders. So that's a critical piece of this. So I talked about the foundation of common language, of defining what the crisis is to your organization. The next is figuring out two things: your values and in the values. So your values, your stakeholders, who matters to you, who matters most to you, and what matters to them. And then you have to build that trust. This is what I mean about thinking through kind of all the things that could go wrong. These are key foundational elements that as you build them, less and less things are going to go wrong.
Well,
And
you bring up a great point too. The like on the values side, that as an executive coach, consultant, I've seen so many companies that those values are really just some dusty plaque on the wall that they half the leaders in the organization probably can't recall what they are. When a company and the leadership team really gets deep and strong on their values and understands why they're there and how those values are driving behavior through the organization, you make a perfect point. Like that sets up crisis management already because they're able to respond from a values based perspective instead of panic. And I like your idea of planning for not just worst case scenarios, but what happens when things don't go your way. And I'm sure you get some resistance from leadership on that. How do you overcome that resistance?
well, honestly, when you're dealing with folks that understand dollars and cents and balance sheets, telling them that their reputation, which is what this all boils back to, is reputational damage, that their reputation is 25 to 40% of their value. And to quote our good friend Warren Buffett, it takes 25 years to build a reputation and 5 minutes to lose one.
Yeah.
And so when you start talking about it in that, because you say, okay, what else in your business, we'll just use the median, what else in your business constitutes 35% of your value? What have you done to protect that? Do you have insurance? Do you have fire drills? Do you, if you are in a tornado prone area, go back to that. Do you have meeting places? So if you have a physical building that is 40% of your value, you protect it. You have smoke detectors and sprinklers and fire drills and insurance and all of these things. So here's something else that's 35% of your value. Let's do the things we need to do to protect it. And back to your point about values for a second, the knowing your values and not having to dust the plaque off, knowing your values, living your values has two benefits. One, a lot of there are a lot of crises born out of that friction between what you're doing, what your values are, and what your reputation is. When that
Well
doesn't
said.
align, that's where it starts. But also it helps make an environment where you can make decisions fast. And that really is the differentiator between being able to mitigate a crisis and get back to business or having to deal with a really bad one. It's speed. And you'll hear a lot of people in crisis comms, crisis management talk about speed. We talk about it as strategic speed. You can't just like, well, this is what I think, and this is what I'm going to go say. Doing all this prep work, doing all this investment allows you to be fast because you don't have to make all the decisions at once. Have you, as a leadership consultant, have you heard of the queuing theory?
Remind me.
That you can make more decisions if you spread them out than you can if you make them at one time. So if they're
Okay.
faster, you can't, you literally cannot make enough decisions in that time frame to be good to respond. But
Yeah,
if
it's
you,
like preparing for when you prepare ahead of time, it's because it's in a different part of your brain, and so you've already got those responses stacked up and ready to roll. And yeah, you don't have to create them in the moment.
and like when it comes to things like values, you've embedded them.
Hopefully.
Everybody knows what they are, hopefully. Everybody knows what they are. So when it comes down to making a decision of something that could be. So there's a couple different kinds of crisis, and one is we call strategic. So you make a decision, new Coke, for instance, if your audience remembers new Coke, that was a strategic decision that didn't go well.
Every business school out there has done case studies on that for decades.
Right. And so when you are making those decisions, you know a few things. You know your audience. If you've done the work, you know your audience. In that one, and tell me if this rings true with your management education. Their audience didn't want new Coke. Their customers didn't want new Coke. So if they'd known their audience, if they'd known their habits, their wants, their likes, they would have known that that's not what they wanted. But also they understood their own values. And I think Coke rebounded from that in just an absolutely amazing way. They've just become such a monolith of honestly great management. They're a really well managed company. I think they've learned a lot from that. But the values help you make decisions.
Yeah.
And in the current climate where the ground is shifting so much, knowing your values, knowing your stakeholders and their values helps you make those decisions. Like Costco, for instance. They're one of few companies in the US that have stood up and said, we're going to keep our diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. And that it was driven by their values. And they didn't have to hem and haw in making the decision. They were asked, they responded because they knew what their values were. And they knew the people that were their main customers, that were their core customers. That's what they wanted, and they stuck by it. So that's and another part of Costco that is really quite wonderful. They show their customers that they care. So there was I think it was hot dogs that were recently recalled. Costco called everyone in their system that had bought those hot dogs and told them to bring them back. That is the kind of action that builds trust with the people that you need to trust you in situations like I'm going to be the tall tree in a windstorm.
One, you bring up a good point in the sense that companies that really truly know their values, they're not reacting to trends and they're not doing things because they think it's going to be the popular thing to do. They're doing it because that's in their DNA. And I've been a massive proponent of values-based leadership for a long time, long before I was a leadership coach. But I've seen the good side and the bad side of it, and it seems so common sense when you see it in action on both sides. But sadly, it's not happening as often as is needed, because as I've gotten deeper into the leadership side, I see the leaders and companies and teams are so busy doing stuff that they're not taking that step back to say, is that really the thing we should be doing? And when you don't have that internal compass or guiding light or North Star or whatever analogy you want to use, you just react to the situations out there instead of making strategic, purposeful, informed decisions, which from the crisis management side is going to make it much easier when something does come up, because you have that game plan. And if you don't have a game plan, you at least have your values to inform how you should respond.
Absolutely. Well, if you know your values and that's your touchstone, everything is batting up against that. Like if it's whatever the wave is, it's it's breaking against that stone of your values. And is it smooth or is it rough? And if it doesn't line up, then you really have an answer and you have to figure out how the external factors that kind of feed into that. But you touched on something, Tim, that I also wanted to talk about, which is, you know, leadership teams are busy. The day to day of running an organization is time consuming. So to step back and say, okay, we have to take a breather. We have to think about the worst possible outcomes. Don't sound like a good time to anyone. So one of our key recommendations to people is create a core crisis team.
Okay.
And sometimes the CEO or president's on it, sometimes they're not. And the core crisis team should be about like 6 to 8 people. A couple of always people that should be on there, communications, legal. Um, and then people that fit one or one of two categories, in best case scenario, both categories. They have subject matter expertise, HR, IT, engineering, kind of all those, or they can make a decision. They have decision-making authority. Best case scenario, everybody has decision-making authority sitting on that, and it is their job. It is that core crisis team to say, all right, it's quarter 2, we haven't done a crisis exercise this year. We need to do that. And you can do that because, oh wait, in the budget planning process, this core crisis team advocated for some funding. We have to set aside X number of dollars to create, to have a crisis simulation or crisis training or a series of crisis training. So you're planning for it by budgeting for it. And then the third thing on this is you have to bake it into people's job descriptions, into their responsibilities. It is by the very nature of what they do that communications departments have a hand in crisis preparation, crisis response, and spotting crisis, quite frankly. And so that's because their job, they're the only folks that their job is to protect the reputation of the company, build it and protect it. But there are a whole lot of other people that live and die by the reputation of a company. Your ability to sell things, your ability to buy things affected by your reputation.
Mhm.
And so building this into other job descriptions is important. And I would also add that if you don't have a communications person, a senior communications person sitting at your leadership table, you're making a mistake.
Okay. Going back to the leadership team, and so you've got this, you know, core communicate or crisis team, and as you said, it's not really, people don't see it as fun to like, oh, let's plan out the worst case scenario or what happens when things go wrong. How do you make it, dare I say, fun or even engaging to run these simulations and meetings?
Well, I don't know if it's necessarily fun, but it's something different. It's a different way of thinking for people. It's taking their day-to-day jobs and thinking about how they would do it in a very high pressure situation and seeing how they would react. There's a lot of team building we find where I'm actually in the process of planning a series of 5 crisis simulations for a global insurance company. So there are 5 regions of the country, or pardon me, of the world. And the idea is for these folks that's exciting is talking about issues they don't normally get to talk about. So it's, it's not the day to day. You get to make it fun because you are tackling things that you don't normally tackle. You're getting to think about things in a new way. And best case scenario, if you're doing this right, you're talking to people you don't normally work with, because that's one of the key characteristics of a good simulation is understanding how diversity of jobs. So it shouldn't just be the communications team. It shouldn't just be uh, leadership team. It should be high on on the hierarchy, low on the hierarchy. Should be breadth wise, IT, legal, HR, communications, finance. How are they all in there, and how are they all mitigating these really tough issues that they have to deal with? And people don't think, finance, why would finance have to think about this? Well, think about a ransomware attack. So you have a ransomware attack. Most people should have ransomware insurance, hopefully. What does your ransomware insurance say? Talk to them, don't talk to them, pay it, don't pay it. Well, if you are on the finance side, you better have a pool of money that if your insurance says pay it, that you can pay it. And if then on the flip side of that is, are you thinking through if you can get, if while you're waiting for the insurance to pay out, do you have enough room to cover what you had to pay out? So those are questions that need to be asked in finance that will become very pertinent in a crisis situation, but that nobody's ever really thought to ask finance. So these situations provide a chance for people to ask the questions that they should be asking on a regular basis, but never have a chance because they're too busy doing their day-to-day job.
Well, and that's an excellent point in the sense that, on the crisis team, having that breadth and scope within the organization is important. Leadership strategy in general, being able to collaborate and know what's going on in other parts of the company and how people work and what they're dealing with is diversity of thought to diversity of opinion and scope. It makes us such a difference when planning out crises, but also how to better lead the organization.
Absolutely. Well, I want to give you one example of one of our clients. So one of our clients is a federal government contractor, and a good portion of their employees are veterans. So here we are. It's the Thursday night. So the Friday before Remembrance Day / Veterans Day weekend is supposed to be a pay period. The night before, the Thursday, their payroll provider called and said, we've had a problem. We're not going to get it there. So, okay, a bunch of veterans who this is their day are not going to get paid. So the challenge for these folks is like, gosh, we don't do this. Our employees who are our bread and butter, like when you are a federal government contractor, people are always trying to poach your staff in the US. So they're not getting paid. They get unhappy. You have a client that is the federal government. You don't want them to be unhappy. And, in this case, X company doesn't pay their veteran employees on Veterans Day weekend is a story you don't want. But these folks had put in all of the work. So they knew that without a doubt, these employees they were going to make sure that they made it through. So they sent an email to all of their employees that said, this is what has happened. We've set up a 1-800 number. If you need help, we will help you. We will make sure you make it through. Send the email out, set up the hotline, and we could do this within, 45 minutes of finding out that there's an issue, because they knew their value was that they were going to figure out they were going to take care of their employees. They knew who had to be in the chain of command to make these decisions to make this happen. And people knew that if something like this happened, they knew what they had to do and they knew their stakeholders, their employees, because they knew that they would read their email because it was Friday, but that they knew that they would want to talk to people on the phone to get it fixed. So I think they had 4,200 employees or something like that. 8 of them called and said, I've just had to pay my mortgage and this, because, it's the 9th of November. So everyone's just paid all their big bills. I was counting on this money to be able to cover. Our client said, no problem. We will help you cover this, and we'll figure out a way to pay it back that doesn't hurt you. 8 or 9 people called. Fast forward 6-8 weeks, they start doing employee surveys. Not only are employees happy, they're happier. Not only do they like their employer, they like them more. And so what could have been a really, really bad day, not just for the company, but their employees, turned into a rallying point, because this company knew their values, they knew their stakeholders, and they could act fast because they made all those decisions before.
That's interesting you say that. I just finished, well, not finished, I'm still listening to an audiobook. I think it's called The Magic of Moments, Chip and Dan Heath or whatever. And they talk about a study where exactly that, post surveys from satisfaction surveys, whether it's employee or customer satisfaction, are often higher after the company's dealt with a crisis properly.
Yep.
It builds that respect. And there was one business owner that said, what you need to do is, he's basically, when you have your client, you need to make sure a couple things go wrong, and then you just go over the top to deal with them. And the author was like, he hasn't actually created these, but he's like, I wouldn't put it past him, because he was so committed to making sure that they were prepared to deal with this, and the employees were empowered and they had the right information to make sure that they could handle any situation like that.
Hmm.
And there was one example he gave of Home Depot. Someone had come in and bought all this lumber and everything like that, and the cashier was just chatting with them, and oh, like, what what project do you got on the go? And the guy said, oh, I think it was his brother or son died or something like that, and I'm building the casket by hand to honor him or something like that. And the cashier said, sir, no need to pay for this. This is on us. You go. And cashier at a Home Depot
Yeah.
um, didn't have the authority to do that, but the culture that the leader had created was that this is a call that she was comfortable to make. And what was it, $100 in lumber or something like that.
Yep.
And the CEO actually brought that up at a meeting and mentioned the story and said, this is exactly what we need our team to be doing, and to be able to make sure that we can do this in the moment. And amazing, just ability to create that culture around autonomy of decision, values-based decision making.
Right. And I think, you can make those decisions as somebody on the front line when you know what your values are. And you think about the gold standard of crisis management, which is the Tylenol cyanide uh, issue, which, if I think about it, may have happened before you and I were born. But it is the gold standard because Tylenol said no one will die under our watch. So a huge cash or a huge financial blow to the company, but they were not going to let anybody die under their watch. So they took all of Tylenol off the shelves. And they spoke about it. They didn't say, okay, we're going to be legally in jeopardy if we talk about this. They said, this is happening. If you have our product, throw it out. If you are a store owner, take it off the shelves. We will reimburse you. It was the whole idea of being more concerned about their customers than they were about the bottom line. And that's the same with the example you just gave for Home Depot. You have to be concerned for the people that matter to you. And that's honestly, those are the types of moments when crises can go from not bad to really bad. If you handle that response poorly, and responses aren't mishandled if you know what you need to invest in. Like your people, your values, they don't go badly if you understand that.
I love that. Yeah, and you're exactly right. Based on what's going on in the world today, what do you see as the most common crises that companies are facing?
I think I'm guessing a lot of your audience, because I'm going to say one thing, but what I would say, I think it's uncertainty.
Yeah.
There is so much uncertainty at the macro level, especially or if you are a multinational company, that there's so much uncertainty that it's hard to know what pathway to take. So if I were leading a company right now, what I would be saying is go back to your touchstone. Remind yourself and everybody you work for what your values are. Do they need to be looked at? Do we need to have a discussion about our values in the current climate? Then have it. But go back to the very foundation of what you are to figure out how to navigate what we're dealing with. And that's and to be super honest with you, Tim, that's not a political comment. There is a lot of change happening in a lot of places.
Mhm.
And, we have a new president in the United States. Canada's about to go into an election with at least one new party leader.
Yeah.
Uh, there's a lot of change happening. And so, as organizations looking to deal with this, if you get government funding, thinking about how you manage that, to be the touchstone of your values and make sure you know who's important to you.
Can't even think of how many business owners that I know that do cross-border business that are full war rooms right now with the 25% tariff
Mhm,
talk. And it's like, how are we going to do business? Are we going to do business?
mhm.
Is it even possible anymore based on what the changes? And it's sort of in limbo at this point. Do we know it's going to happen? When is it going to happen? There's been a delay, but I met so many leaders that are in, yeah, they're circling up their teams and doing this. But as you said, it would be a lot easier if these types of things were pre-planned.
Well, and it's kind of not a surprise. And this is part of, I think, that I would say, with put my political hat on for a second, that President Trump made no he did not hide what his intentions were.
Mhm.
He campaigned on a lot of what he is doing. And so, as a company that's trying to navigate those, you know, the decisions that have been made out of the administration, those also could have been prepared for beyond the values, beyond your stakeholders, taking a look at what government is doing. I think a lot of business owners, I'll never forget this, and I'm not going to say who is involved, but somebody at an event in Silicon Valley said, I don't believe in God. I don't believe in government. I believe in the Church of Silicon Valley. And that wasn't until a United States senator put a hold on a bill that was really important to them. And so, understanding how government can impact you is a critical part of doing business. So this is beyond crisis management. This is hey, I've been working in and out of government for a really long time. Figure out how changes in the government, yours or your trading partners, how that can impact you so you can prepare for it. I'm starting to sound like a Boy Scout.
It's very true though, and I think about it from a Calgary perspective. It's very oil and gas focused, and so that's nothing new around government regulations and whether pipelines can go, and drilling rights and things like that. That's all like standard operating procedure for a lot of companies in here. But when we take it up a level and look at, okay, what other government and local, national, provincial governments can impact what we do, and how are we planning for that? That's ideally part of the leadership strategy. And as you mentioned, when you have a team that's dedicated to that, they can run through these scenarios and they can bring them up to other stakeholders in the organization and say, hey, how would you respond to this? And what protections are we putting in place? Do we need extra insurance? Do we need a plan of action when and if this happens? Hopefully it never does, but what's our strategy?
Those are the best words for us. It's we're going to plan for it and hope it, and it may never happen to us, but we're going to plan for it, because that actually increases the chance that it will never happen to you if you
Yeah.
plan for it. But I think so. Some governmental advice on this is, when we do crisis management simulations with big organizations, we insist that government relations are a part of it, because it is such an important aspect when you are in a heavy regulatory environment, that if you don't factor into the regulatory response of your crisis, you might as well just start from the beginning. Understanding I don't remember, because I'm old and I don't remember things anymore. I don't remember how heavily regulated telecom is in Canada, but it's very heavily regulated here in the US. And so when you make those decisions, you have to understand one of your key stakeholder groups are your regulators. And the people that know those best are your government affairs people.
Yeah,
We went down a little tangent, but I felt like that was a really important part to say about all of this.
absolutely. And so, putting on, looking into your crystal ball, what do you see future of crisis management looking like, and how does it affect leadership?
I think that everyone's talking about AI. Everybody's talking about AI. I think AI will impact crisis in two ways. The response of AI on your business, deep fakes, that sort of thing. But then I think it's also going to democratize a lot of tools around crisis management. The ability to do um, not in-depth crisis simulations like we do. You do need a human to maneuver all the levers, but there's a lot you can do for yourself that is going to be aided by AI. So there's something that we have, it's called Crisis of the Month. What we recommend to our clients is you don't have to call us. We don't have to be there every month running a full-scale simulation for you. Just every staff meeting, hold up your industry publication and say, what would we do if this happened to us? And if your team doesn't know what you would do if that happened to you, that's when you call us. But what we do is we have a free service on our website, or actually I think it's just on my Substack. And it's called Crisis of the Month. And people sign up and we will send you a crisis that you can then run through with your team to say, what if this happened to us? And there's 4 questions, some resources to check against if you're doing the right thing or the wrong thing. But that stuff like that is going to be enhanced with AI. Hopefully, someday you can send a notification to your entire company and say, okay, right now is crisis management prep time. And it's done in a way that people live, because not everyone's sitting at their desk all the time. Not everyone's in the boardroom together. So I think AI will help democratize a lot.
Awesome. I like that. It's like going to the gym every month. Well, hopefully people go to the gym more than every month, but for crisis management, it's a good, put the reps
Absolutely.
in, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So if you could leave leaders with, I guess, one piece of advice to help them be better prepared, particularly for that worst day scenario, what would it be?
Start planning now. Don't
The
be
best time to
afraid.
plan was uh,
It- it-
yesterday.
yeah. Second best time is today.
Yeah.
That, and don't be afraid to think about your bad days, because thinking about the bad days make them less bad. So start now and think about the bad days. That would be my biggest recommendations.
Awesome. Well, Stephanie, I will make sure your links go up in the show notes. And I think when we chatted last, you mentioned you have a 10. What's the 10
The 10
steps
things,
to?
yeah, 10 things you can do in a crisis. And we've created a dedicated webpage for your listeners. And so I'll give it, it'll be in the show notes with everything else.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to have you on the show, and I look forward to reconnecting soon. We can chat all
Absolutely.
things Canada and US and politics.
Thank you so much, Tim. It was a great pleasure.
That wraps up another episode of the Working Well podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Now, which guests or topics would you like to see featured on the show? Message me through LinkedIn or on the contact page of timboris.com with your ideas. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tim Boris with Fresh Wellness Group, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.